destined in, but to act, that each tomorrow finds us farther than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb-driven cattle. Be a hero in the strife. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act, act, act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all around, all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints in the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing those footprints, shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Act. Wadsworth knew in the face of death, policies that kill, structures that kill, people who believe in justice must act. We cannot be like dumb-driven cattle. We must be heroes and sheroes in the strife. Frederick Douglass, I read this every week of my life. After the signing of the Dred Scott decision, when the Supreme Court, he said, was stacked against us, the magistrates, the armed forces, the misuse of the Constitution, the Dred Scott decision was passed by a stacked Supreme Court. That ain't new, y'all. A stacked Supreme Court that did exactly what they were put on the court to do. And they said, declared that a black man or woman had no rights that a white person ever had to acknowledge. Frederick Douglass was asked to speak, and he did speak. Sojourner Truth reminded him when he was worried, Frederick, God is not dead. He went to the podium, and for the first 30-some minutes, he labored on how ugly things were, how unjust things were, how harsh things were. But then he said, as monstrous as these decisions are, could something else be at work? He said, could this monstrous act be a necessary link in the chain of events toward the downfall of the entire system of slavery? He said, what I do know is that every attempt to stop us and allow our progress only serves to intensify and embolden our agitation. This is why we this morning will take a hard look at the ugly reality of death by poverty, the fourth leading cause of death in America, higher than homicide. And yet every night on the TV you see things about homicide, but nothing about policy death and policy murder. But maybe the fact that we are having to face this is in some strange way a necessary link in the chain of events that will not stop us, but will intensify and embolden our agitation. Mother Jones said, you pray for the dead, but you fight like hell for the living. Martin Luther King was headed to to D.C. when he stopped by Memphis. The Poor People's Campaign was not started by Dr. King. It was the Welfare Rights Women and Dr. King and Mary Wright Edelman. They were all a team. It wasn't men against women. It wasn't preacher against advocates. It was a team effort. A year before his death, he spoke at Riverside Church and declared that there are three evils, triune evils: poverty, militarism, and racism, that had to be addressed, and that America could not claim some of the things she was claiming around the world until those things were addressed. The next morning, 150 odd newspapers wrote negative articles. He lost his invitation to the White House. Most of his own denomination talked against him. Many of the civil rights organizations wrote articles against him. He went on during the course of that year. At the end of that year, December, he preached a sermon about the meaning of hope, but he started with despair. He started with the despair, talking about the reality of two Americas. One America flowing with milk and honey, where everybody seemed to have everything they need, but a very small portion. The other America, where death and destitution and depravity was the order of the day. And he said, and yet in this despairing reality, we have to challenge it. We have to have this Poor People's Campaign. He said 3 triune evils. Today, we say 5 interlocking injustices. Systemic racism, say that. Systemic poverty. Ecological devastation. Slash the denial of health care. The war economy. And the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. 5 interlocking injustices that today that we must face. He was calling the people, and the women were calling the people. My dear sister from California reminded me again, we've been waiting 50 years for this reunion, not to be an organization, not to be a place where you get in and fight over, you know, what color the napkin's gonna be for the luncheon and stuff, and who's gonna hold an office, but a movement of people, poor and low wealth people, advocates, religious and moral leaders united together. Because my brothers and sisters, there's one thing I want to say to this gathering in this Congress. This is no time for foolishness. If you are here to fight over foolish things, please exit. Because we don't have time. People are dying. If you're here for any other reason, because nobody has to be here, if you're here for any other reason but love and to embrace one another and to move as a movement and to do some things, be faithful over a few things, we love you. But this ain't no time for foolishness. This is only a time to fight for love, fight for justice, and fight for truth. Touch your neighbor and say, if you're here for that, I'm with you. I touch the other one. If you're here for foolishness, please get a ticket back home. And so Dr. King was on his way here, and they made their way to Memphis. They were almost going to regroup because they had made the declaration, we're going to stay in D.C. until change comes, but there were some strategic errors in that later on they talked about. But he went to Memphis where people were dying. 2 garbage workers were dying simply because they sat inside of a garbage truck during a rainstorm. And lightning hit the button, caused the truck mechanics to crush them. That's what got them to Memphis. Folk were dying just for trying to get out of the rain. They were already being paid less than a living wage, but they were dying because they weren't allowed to go inside. And somebody said, "Doc, why are you going to go to Memphis?" He said, "You know people are trying to kill you. They've been trying to kill you ever since, especially you did the Riverside speech." And Doc said, "The issue is not what's going to happen to me if I go, but what's going to happen to them if I don't." And if we can't stop and care about poor people in Memphis on the way to D.C., if we can't build from the state up, there's no need to go to D.C. down. That's why in this movement, Liz and I have always said, and pulling from the Moral Monday movement, that we learned several things. Number one, when you get in a movement, you got to stay in it. You can't be a one event movement. You can't get mad because everything doesn't change in 1 week or because you had one rally. You know, you got to stay in it. And secondly, you have to build from the state up. This country never changed from D.C. down. It changed from Birmingham up, from Selma up, from Greensboro up, from Memphis up, from Little Rock up. And so they just giving me another note. I have to multitask. But not only did this poem say this, and Frederick Douglass and Mother Joan, our Constitution says that the whole purpose for this endeavor, and even though, as one person said, that when the framers of the Constitution were writing, racism was like a cobra underneath the table, and every time they attempted to move away from slavery, it would poison the conversation. But even so, somehow, maybe it was the finger of God despite what they were trying to write, it said to ensure domestic tranquility, to establish justice, to promote the general welfare, and to provide for the common defense. And then in the 1868 and 1870s, the Constitution had a rebirth with the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law for all citizens. No. Equal protection under the law for all persons. Doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not. And we must declare that poor people dying at a rate, the fourth highest cause of death in America, is not ensuring domestic tranquility. It is not establishing justice. It is not promoting the general welfare. It is not providing for a defense, common defense, and it is not equal protection under the law. And America, since you said that's what you're going to be about, then we're going to make you be about what you said you were going to be about. We have legitimate discontent. But not only that, our declaration says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but then it says that the people have the right, whenever there's been a long train of abuses, the people have the right to reshape, restructure, and change that government anytime it is contrary to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to suggest that unnecessary poverty has been a long train of abuse. People not having health care has been a long train of abuse. Not raising the minimum wage to a living wage has been a long train of abuse. Underfunding education has been a long train of abuse. Attacking gay people and trans people and the LGBTI community has a long train of abuse. And we have a right and a duty And so, my brothers and sisters, there's one more thing that gathers us here. We must know our calling. And what is our calling in what I call the aftermath? We had it on the screen. I'd have somebody put up the aftermath. You see, the before math was 140 million people living in poverty and low wealth, 87 million people without health care or underinsured. The before math. The before math was nearly 1 million people who were homeless. The before math, or without homes or on the brink of homelessness. The before math was people being able to buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. The before math, according to the Columbia Mailman School of Public Policy in 2009, was 250,000 people dying a year from poverty, 700 people a day, the before math. And then COVID hit. In fact, the before math was people dying, poverty being the fourth highest cause of death. You're going to hear that today. That's not because of COVID. That's what we went into COVID with. And then the during math was 330,000 people dying from COVID, not dying from COVID, but dying because they didn't have health care. States that could have expanded health care didn't. And so in places like Mississippi, we had one family lost 20 members in a 30-mile radius. That's the during math. The during math is that we passed child income tax credit, picked a large percent of children out of poverty, and then dropped them right back into poverty. During COVID, we called people essential but treated them like they were expendable. Go to work, we said, as a nation and save us, but we're not going to pay you living wages. Go to work and risk your life, but we're not going to give you health care. Go to work. Go to work. Go to work. But we're going to treat you like, oh, we'll ring a bell at 6 o'clock. We'll clap our hands. But that doesn't do anything when you go to work and you feel like you're saving people who don't even care if you live. During math, say the during math. During the COVID, we saw large numbers of people, poor people, died at a rate 3 to 5 times higher than the rest of the country. And it wasn't because COVID discriminated toward poor people. It's because the nation discriminated in how we made sure poor people had what they needed to survive. During COVID, we saw that we had an opportunity to raise the living wage. And if we had, nearly 50 million Americans would have been raised up, and others would have been raised up out of poverty and low wealth. 41% of all African Americans could have been raised out of poverty and low wealth with one vote. The vote comes, it's been debated, it's been a part of the presidential campaign, and then 2 Democrats and 49 Republicans say no to nearly 50 million people. But they give 68% of all the COVID relief money to corporations. And we make more billionaires during COVID while more poor people fall into poverty. Because we lifted them for a moment. You know, somebody said poverty numbers went down. Yeah, they did, about $20 million. They went down because of the stuff we were fighting for, and we proved that if you do the right policies, you can end poverty and low wealth. The problem is we did a little bit during COVID, then after COVID, now all the stuff is being snatched away. Just last week, 6 million people thrown off of Medicaid. Come on. That's the during math. And so here we are now in the aftermath. What do we do in the aftermath? And in the aftermath, the numbers are going back up. In the aftermath, we're finding out that what we went into, we didn't know the 4th leading cause of death. In the aftermath, over 1 million people died from COVID, and we haven't spent 1 week mourning. Just 1 week mourning and remembering. Well, my brothers and sisters, since we're in the aftermath, then we must make a solemn declaration. Those who have died will not have died in vain. We cannot turn back now. In the aftermath, we must intensify and embolden our agitation. we must commit even the more in the aftermath to shift the narrative, to build a movement, to put a face on the pain, to refuse to accept things as they are. We must commit in the aftermath to be even greater truth tellers and love showers and justice seekers and movement builders. We must be in state capitals. We must be in Congress. We must be in the street. We must be in pulpits. We must be in voting booths. We must be seen. We must be heard. We must be felt. We must use every moral and nonviolent tool at our disposal. We don't have to be an insurrection because we are a resurrection and we're not going anywhere. Nowhere. We cannot be silent anymore. We cannot be unseen or unheard anymore. We cannot accept poverty as a death sentence. We must have a third Reconstruction. We must face these interlocking injustices with an intersectional moral fusion movement to turn the tide and to help heal the land. And guess what? We are that movement. Tell your neighbor, we are that movement. We are that movement until death is stopped, until children are protected, until sick folk are healed. We are that movement until low-wage workers are paid and affordable houses are provided and the atmosphere is saved. We are that movement until voting rights are expanded, until saving the world and living in peace and lifting the poor is more important than spending money to blow up the world and hurt the poor. We are that movement. We will be that movement. We are not going anywhere. We won't be silent anymore. Are you that movement? Are you going to stand? Since you're alive in the aftermath, stand. Since you made it through COVID, stand. Since you're still here, stand. Somebody shout, we are that movement. We are that movement. We are that movement. That's right. That's right. Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. We are that Now we have to deal with, and the reason we invited C-SPAN, because we can't keep this knowledge in here. You can't shock the heart of the nation if you keep your light under a bushel. You can't shock the heart of the nation and be a moral defibrillator unless you go where the problem is. And so, truth is a moral defibrillator. Policies don't change just with numbers. Policies change when you connect faces to numbers. That's why in this movement, we really don't have a lot of things we do. We want to be faithful over a few things, right? Change the narrative, put a face on the policies, do simultaneous committed things so we're not all individual states doing our own thing, right? Engage at state capitals, which we'll talk about Wednesdays. Engage in the Congress. Be a massive, awake the massive sleeping giant of poor and low wealth people who now make up 40% of the electorate in battleground states and 30% in non-battleground states. And then just keep being consistent. You don't chop a tree down with one hit of the axe. You got to cut where you want it to fall. That's why we always have an agenda. We ain't loud, and we're not just cursing the darkness. We got an answer. Worst thing you can do is get up and talk about what's wrong and not have an answer. And and that's our angle. And then we just keep hitting in the same place. I don't know if we are that movement that will finish what others started. I don't know if we're that movement that will push all the way almost to the end and then another generation will finish it. But we are that movement, that intersectional moral fusion movement. And we're here to stay. And we're in every state. We got tri-chairs, so you can't kill all of us. Ain't no one person gonna stop this movement. And we love this country enough to call out an impoverished democracy. And we love all the people in it, whether you got a card or no card, because God made you. You are a creation of the divine, and you're welcome in our midst. This session is on poverty equals death. Just to say that makes you almost sick on the stomach. That poverty equals death. And so with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, and the Yale Center for Public Policy and Public Theology, we wanted to sponsor this first session. Pairs of the Breach in Kairos Center to sponsor this first session so that we really know what's going on, not assume it. We want it to be on you when you go tomorrow. We want your eyes to look like you've seen the death and you can't accept it. We want your hearts to be pumping with a moral refusal. You know, like sometimes you just got to have a eternal discontent. You don't have to be evil. You don't have to use weapons and knives and kill nobody. But you can have an eternal discontent. But you first got to see it. And then we said in this movement, we will not be loud and wrong. So we got these powerful scholars, and they told me, they said, we've been waiting for a movement. And I said, well, we got one. Bring your footnotes on over here. Give them a hand. Dr. David Brady. Wave your hand, David. Dr. Valerie Wilson, economic policy. Dr. Greg Gonzalez, who's a public health specialist from Yale. Dr. David Brady, he's got all this research. And then our own attorney, Valerie Equivon. And coming to us by video, Jonathan Hartgrove, Minister Jonathan Hartgrove. He's at a conference where people are getting white nationalism and white evangelicalism exercised out of them. Lord have mercy. But before we go to them, we in our movement always start with a face of those who are impacted. See these testimonies. Are we ready? 2
minutes. 2 minutes.
We've got 2 minutes, all right. Just take a time and sit with it for a moment. Tell you what, Belle, let's pray a little bit of precious memories. Somebody, who lost somebody during COVID? Who knows somebody that died from poverty, from not having health care? Let's bring them in the room. Let's bring their ancestors in the room. I'm a pastor, so I'm going to take y'all into church just a little bit. We went here doing Aretha Franklin's funeral. Belle, help me if I mess the words up. But we will not let those who died needlessly, their lives be forgotten. Call their names right now. As long as you call their names, they're never really dead. And if you want to stand for them, stand for them. If you want to say, I fight in your memory, Reverend William Barber Sr., my daddy, I fight in your memory. I buried him yesterday, some 30 years ago on Father's Day. I know you've met some people in your research. So scholars, if you want to call their names. Oh Lord. Precious Marie, precious memory. Oh, how. Come on, some of y'all that know how to sing out there. Come on, Yara. Oh, they ever flood my soul. Flood my soul. Come on, Yara. Oh. In the stillness, 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 stillness of the midnight, yeah. Oh yes, sacred scene unfold. Come on, everybody, precious, precious memory. Whoa, how? Where you at, Liz? We remember your mama this morning, Liz. How? They never flood my soul. Oh yes, oh yes. Whoa, we remember your mama. We remember your mama. Hallelujah, in the stillness. Well, oh yes. Say, hey, great memory. Oh, yes. Sit with that for a minute. Go ahead and play it.
all the ancestors. Bring them in the room. Come on, bring them in the room. Hey! Come on in here, Harriet. Come on in here, Frederick. Come on in here, Mother Jones. We need you. We need you. Your memory is not lost. Come on in here, Dorothy Day. Come on in here, Rosa. Hey! Bring up the testimony.
Pamela, would you share your story from Alabama?
Hi, my name is Pamela Roach. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama, and I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids. Yes.
Hey, Pam.
Hi.
William Barber.
All
Evan
right.
Barber.
Nice to meet you.
Still Harris.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for letting us come. I just heard you stay here, and I just heard $100,000.
Yes.
Over 100.
What was
Over
it?
100.
Single wide, 20 years ago.
Yes.
You're still paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
And look at this. She's going to show the shape.
Yeah. Because with $100,000 20 years ago, you could have bought a house.
Yeah.
But they scammed. They wouldn't give you the loan for the house, but they give you the loan for the trailer.
Yeah, I'm on one of them out too.
But see, it should be illegal, in a sense, to charge somebody. This probably 5 times more than it's worth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
And 20 years ago. What you got here is predatory lending, which is all predatory lending. Is when people lend in poor communities, get people all tied up in debt forever. Right. You know, because on a house mortgage interest is only normally about, what, 3%?
Yeah,
Something like that. Yeah.
I feel bad because I don't have stuff to give my children. I'm paying all these bills, and they need school clothes and stuff, and they be asking me for it. I can't give it to them.
Do you see that somebody that would take advantage of a poor family as criminal?
Yeah, it was sick. Yes,
like
it's a criminal.
It's criminal.
Yes, they treated us wrong.
That's right.
Can I pray with you? Eternal God who loves justice, mercy, and grace, we thank you today for Pamela, her strength, her family. We stand against this kind of oppression and wrong. And we thank you for giving her the courage by your spirit to say, I'll no longer be quiet or silent or in hiding. And her daughter's in the room, I believe.
Yes,
She's
she
10
is.
years old, and she is on a CPAP machine, pre-existing condition, because of the mold that's in this trailer that she can't get out of because of predatory lending in Alabama.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung. But I'm here to tell you, as long as I've got a voice, I'm going to fight with everything I've got to try to get these guys their black lung benefit. Right now, there's a move on, especially in Kentucky, with this new right-to-work law. Now, it's gotten rid of every United Mine Worker Union in the state of Kentucky. There's none anymore in the state of Kentucky. I've been a union member since 1968. I have black lung. I worked 41 years in the coal mines. But to get back to your question, when you introduce laws like that, you're not looking at increasing minimum wage. You're looking at going backwards. The war on poverty supposedly started 50-some years ago. We got an old saying in the coal mines, it's rough at the face. Well, where I live in southeastern Kentucky, it's rough at the face because the poverty in that area hasn't gotten better. It's worse today than it's ever been. And it's not looking any promising at all. until something is done.
And to all the fathers that have lost their children, I grieve with you. We have lost all 3 of our children to suicide and pain and killing drugs. Our children should have been given a fighting chance had they gotten the mental health care we all deserve. Our first son, a law school graduate, the first to leave us. It was only 33 days later, his sister, a junior at UW-Madison, Wisconsin, completed her suicide. When she went for help, she was turned away. Too many visits, Isabel. Their surviving brother spoke in front of her casket and said this: "By standing here, I feel like I am betraying them." 2 years later, death clothed in an uncaring world, the loneliness of the spirit, unresolved grief aided by opioids before the fentanyl set in. His note written to us, his parents, said, "Sorry for the mess."
Jesus.
There should have been crime scene tape around every one of their bodies. There should be crime scene tape around every one of our children's bodies that fall in the streets. When the destroyer came to our lands from across the ocean, he wore faces of disease, war, starvation, dispossession, enslavement, boarding schools, trafficking of our young. He lives here still. The destroyer lives here still. 1 in 3 of us as Native people live in poverty. The suicides of our young. Since 1999, suicide is up 71% for our men, 139% for our women.
I'm from the adjoining parish in what's called Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley, worse than that, in their quest, I think, to commit genocide against the poor black people of that 80-mile strip, we have been deemed a sacrificial zone. Not only have they dubbed us Cancer Alley, they have actually officially said that we are a dispensable people. They came into our community in St. John and put this horrible chemical plant 1,500 feet away from an all-black elementary school. They have increased the poisons on that school of 400 to 500 black children.
I live in the same household with my 88-year-old father-in-law, who is also a Kansas farmer. And I want to tell you something that scares me to death. Kansas farmers are committing suicide at a far greater rate than the national average. Why? Because they're stressed out. They're stressed out. They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs because they can't pay for all the equipment that it takes to run a farm. And they're in the most dangerous line of work there is, yet many can't afford to buy health insurance. They work day in and day out, and they rarely get a break. And they don't talk much sometimes. They're kind of silent, they analyze things. And every now and then, my 88-year-old father-in-law says something that gives me pause, that he's thought about suicide because he's getting old and crippled, and my husband does all the heavy lifting. And every now and then I hear something and I'm like, what did he just say? And everybody in our community knows that some combine death might sound a little fishy, like, how exactly was that an accident? Yeah, every farmer that I know knows someone that has committed suicide, and every farmer I know worries about the water, because water is life.
Pamela, would you share your story from Alabama?
Can you hear me in this? brought this movement. I'm waiting for them. Thank you. And I know that sometimes there is a kind of a nervous laughter, but in respect for all of the folk here, you know, we are that movement that puts everybody in the room. I had a conversation one time and somebody said, well, Reverend Barber, why don't you just, you know, do things with black people? And Liz said, why don't you just do things with women? That's not what a moral fusion movement is. And you have to hear that. This is a space where we put a black woman in Alabama in the same space with a Kentucky coal miner. We put a Kentucky coal miner in the same space as a Native indigenous brother and his suicide children, because what we recognize is that everybody has a right to live. And we don't have, and while silos are important sometimes, we have to have at least a movement, a moral movement in every moment in history that connects the dots and the injustices and recognizes that you don't have to put racism over here and classism over here and ecological devastation over here and all that, because the truth of the matter is, if you die from cancer, you don't die black, you don't die white, you don't die Republican, you don't die Democrat, you die dead. Now that doesn't mean we disrespect this disparity. We do disaggregation of the numbers. Oh, that's important. You have to. We do the percentage disaggregation and the raw number disaggregation. That's why in this movement we can tell you that there are 26 million poor, low-wealth black people. That's 60% of black population. There are 30% of poor, low-wealth white people. That's 66 million white folk. 26 million black, 66 million white. We look at the percentage differences. We look at the impact. But what we also know is if you're poor and you can't pay your light bill, when the lights go off, we all black in the dark. And there has to be a moral fusion movement that says you won't divide us anymore, and recognizes that the same forces that attack the LGBTQI community are the same ones attacking voting rights, and the same ones attacking voting rights are attacking health care, and the same ones attacking health care are attacking living wages, and the same ones attacking living wages are blocking fixing the environment, and the same ones blocking fixing the environment are funding the military, and the same ones funding the military in gross ways are oftentimes engaged in religious nationalism. And if they are cynical enough to be together, we have to be smart enough to come together and to stay together. That's what a moral fusion movement does. It's not about being an organization, it's about being an organism. And so now Dr. Brady, who has brought this research to life, because he told me something one day, he didn't hear me after he said it. I cursed a couple of times because he said, and I put my phone on me, I said, did he just say this stuff is readily available? It's sitting out there. And I said, well, if it's sitting out there, why is it that every night you hear about homicide, but you don't hear about death by poverty, and yet poverty is killing more people than homicide, killing more people than the police? And so we invited him to come. You've already introduced the scholars. We're going to have a conversation, and he's going to take a few minutes and walk us through the footnote of our frustration. He's going to walk through the logical, empirical data that undergirds our legitimate discontent. All right? Dr. Brady.
Thank you. Okay, so do we have slides or no slides? No slides. All right. Okay, so there were going to be some slides, and thank you, first of all, for being here. It's a real honor to be on this stage, and it's also a real honor to be useful, to have generated some kind of social science knowledge. Oh, we do have slides. All right. And to have generated some knowledge that could be useful for this moral campaign. So I really liked the call that we had earlier of fight poverty, not the poor, because I've been saying for years that we need to think of it as a problem of poverty, not the poor. The typical way Americans think about poverty is to think of poor individuals, the choices, behaviors, the traits of those poor individuals. And it's a better way to think of poverty as a systemic problem of America. And when I say it's systemic, I would say poverty is systemically high. I mean 5 concrete things. First, and you can advance the slide, Okay, so first, poverty affects a huge population. By the measure I use, about 17.5% of Americans were poor in 2019, which is roughly 57 million people. All right, and this is a huge share of our population. There are other numbers out there, but this is a reasonable number. And
David, let me interject, because the folk here, because of our numbers.
Sure.
You mean, well, we do poverty and low wealth, but you're looking at actual just poverty.
Sure.
Your data, if you could go further and add poverty and low wealth as we do, because we think it's essential, but for this point this morning, he wants to drive home.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so just low income, and I'll talk about how I define it in just a moment, but just low income in that sense. And this number is quite high, as I mentioned. Now, one of the ways we can say it's huge is that the Pew Research Center annually surveys Americans and asks Americans, what are the biggest problems in America? And of the problems that Americans mention, the most highly mentioned are the affordability of health care, violent crime, quote unquote illegal immigration, gun violence, and unemployment. And there's been, of course, considerable attention to evictions and mass incarceration and COVID in recent years. But interestingly, Pew has never listed poverty as one of the biggest problems that Americans say they face. And yet, as we see in this figure right here, there are 64 times as many people that experience poverty as experience an eviction, 32 times as many people experience poverty as are incarcerated at one point in time, 17 times as many people are victims of poverty as are victims of violent crime, and there are more than 5.5 times as many people in poverty as there are undocumented immigrants. And in the first year of COVID, there were twice as many people that were in poverty as were infected by COVID. Other rich democracies. And that's not a new fact. Lots of people have said this. But what we've learned is that poverty is very consistently high. We have data on the United States and other rich democracies for several decades, and we've seen consistently for several decades the United States hovers around 17% poor, whereas the typical country has a poverty rate of as low as 9 or 10%. So what's unusual about the United States is that it's consistently high. A third way in which poverty is systemically high is that it's egregiously or outrageously high for certain groups. All right, so we often say that America has high child poverty, but the reality is child poverty for white kids especially is not very different from what you see for child poverty in Germany or France. Go ahead. What? True. So in the United States, only about 10% of white kids are poor, which is too high. But that's a similar rate of child poverty to what all of Germany has or what all of France has. And the reason the United States has such extraordinarily high child poverty is we have egregiously high child poverty for Black, Latino, and Native American children. So in the United States, about a third of African American children are poor. No country in the history of rich democracies over the past 50 years has had a child poverty rate that high. Go to the next slide, please. Go ahead, and yeah, perfect. And you can see it right here. So you can see really it's the Black, Latino, and Native American kids that are pulling up the American high child poverty rate, and down there in the dashed line that goes up and down is your typical poverty rate for a rich democracy. And what's really unusual is that we have these groups that we punish with egregiously high rates of child poverty. Now, two other ways in which America has systemically high poverty is that it's surprisingly high for those that play by the rules. Even for people that meet the standard of socioeconomic achievement in America. They get married, they have kids after they're married, they finish high school, and they work. Even for those groups, poverty is disturbingly high. So one of my favorite statistics is there are about 3 times as many poor people in working households as there are in jobless households. Now finally, of course, we all know we're representing all these different states. Poverty is pervasive across places in the United States. It's also pervasive across all groups. Yeah, so poverty occurs in the suburbs, in the rural areas, in the cities, in South Dakota where I grew up, in California where I live now, and here in Washington, D.C. You can advance the slide to the next slide. All right, so now one of the things we've learned as social scientists, we haven't learned much, but one thing we can say with confidence is poverty is bad for your health. All right, it's associated with nearly every single health outcome. One of my friends, Bruce Link, is a famous public health researcher, and I asked him, I was like, are there any diseases or health conditions that are not associated with poverty? And he really had to stop and think, and he thought about it for a long time, and he's like, maybe brain cancer, maybe? And so that just tells you every health condition is associated with poverty. And this is the case even though we know that being unhealthy is bad for poverty too. So if you get sick, you get disabled, you're depressed, you can't work as much, of course it also works that way, but it doesn't matter. Poverty leads to deprivation, material, relative deprivation. It's stressful, it's bad for your mental health, and exposes you to a variety of toxins. Now, one thing I want to say is we got to be a little bit careful, according to the health researchers, about how we talk about causes and risk of death. When they talk of a cause of death, they mean the physiological thing that breaks down in your body. So heart disease, lung disease, something breaks down physiologically in you. What we mean by a cause of death is more of a risk factor. Poverty is a cause of the causes of death. It's a risk that puts you at risk of death. And in this sense, we can think of it as, some would say, a fundamental cause of death. All right? And in this sense, poverty is a risk factor like smoking or drinking or obesity. It's bad for your health, right? And even though we know poverty is bad for your health, and we know that poverty is definitely is huge in the United States, it's really remarkable to me that we didn't have the number before of how many deaths are associated with poverty. I thought surely somebody's gotten this number. Somebody's estimated this number before, and I learned that this was not actually the case. All right, and so I could talk about why that is in the Q&A. But I'll just tell you briefly a little bit about this study so you understand the evidence that we've generated that's hopefully useful for this movement, okay? So the study, what you do is use what's called panel data, and what you're doing is you're following the same 20,000 people every 2 years. So imagine you start in 1997, and you interview these people, and then you come back to them 2 years later. And in 97, you knew if they were poor or not, and by 99 and 2001 and 2003 and so forth, you know whether or not they passed away. So a simple and clean way to think about this is if you're poor in 2017, what were the odds that you died by 2019 versus someone that was not poor in 2017?
So part of what, David, I hear you saying is this panel data, and we want the folk to hear this. You know, this is not you just threw something together. We don't do that. You know, this is real research. And when you use this panel way, you're able to look at it over a period of time. And also, I hear you saying, help people to understand what we often talk about. If you get locked into poverty, you can get locked in, sure. Literally locked in.
Sure. And so there's two ways we can think of poverty. One is, are you currently poor? Were you poor this year? But we also look at what we call cumulative poverty. So over the past 10 years, what proportion of those years were you poor? And we can estimate the effect of each of these on your probability of passing away. Now, beyond all that, I'll add that we're going to give these numbers. We've been saying poverty is the fourth leading cause of death, or at least as big as the fourth leading cause of death. But actually, those numbers are conservative. And I mean conservative, and they're probably underestimates.
No, yeah. I'm just being a black preacher, my.
And so I'll tell you, so you understand the numbers, why they're conservative. They're lower bound estimates. It's probably much higher than this. First of all, we don't have children in our data. We're only looking at people 15 years old and over. A big cause of death in America is infant mortality, and of course that's associated with poverty. Now, we control for all kinds of other factors. We know whether or not people have chronic conditions, like Alzheimer's, whether they have diabetes and so forth, whether they've experienced an acute health event, like a stroke or a heart attack, and we can control for those. Even controlling for those factors, we're finding these effects of poverty. Further, we stopped our analysis in 2019 before COVID, and as we all know, COVID killed a lot of people because of poverty. Now, moreover, all of the social science studies that we do, especially our own, we're missing a lot of poor people. Our surveys are biased to underrepresent poor people. We don't count the unhoused people because we have a household panel survey. If you don't have a household, we can't interview you, okay? We don't count institutionalized people, and most likely many of them would be poor. Now, moreover, think about who doesn't answer survey questions. Who doesn't answer surveys? It's poor people. Low-income people are less likely to participate in surveys. So I teach in Southern California, and when I ask my students, many of whom are undocumented students themselves or children of undocumented immigrants, I say the Census Bureau comes up to your door and knocks on the door, would you tell them how many people live here and how much money the household has? And no, they wouldn't do that. So we're missing these disadvantaged populations systemically, and so our estimates are conservative, okay? So think of poverty as a risk factor that can be expressed through lots of kinds of ways of disease, but it is a conservative estimate. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. All right, and so the way to think about this is you can come up with these estimates, and we can tell you that poverty would increase the probability of mortality by a factor of 1.4. That's current poverty. Being poverty today will increase the probability of mortality by a factor of 1.4. Cumulative poverty, the proportion being poor over the past 10 years, in this case being poor all of the past 10 years, increases the probability of mortality by a factor of 1.7. But those numbers are called hazard ratios, and I find them a little bit hard to understand. So look at this graph. It gives you a clear sense of what these numbers mean. The black line are those people that are not in poverty, and the x-axis is the age of these people. And as you see, the black line, these people are surviving. This is a survival curve, but then they start to pass away as they get older, because unfortunately, age still predicts mortality. All right? The yellow line is for those in poverty. And what you see is that their survival starts to fall off much sooner than those not in poverty. And especially in the ages of 40s, 50s, and 60s, you see a much lower survival rate amongst those in poverty than amongst those not in poverty. And think of it this way, is that poverty is killing people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s prematurely versus those that are not in poverty. Now, this is a big amount of mortality this leads to, and you can go to the next slide, and you can see some ways to compare this. So like I said, we can be technical and say it's not a cause, it's a risk factor, causes are physiological breakdowns, but I can tell you that poverty would be as big as the fourth leading cause of poverty, all right? And in current poverty, just this right now being poor, this amounts to 6.5% of deaths, which is about 183,000 deaths in the United States, or as Reverend Barber taught me, about 500 deaths a day. And that's just current poverty. Current poverty leads to more death than accidents, lower respiratory diseases, stroke, Alzheimer's. I like to point out that we worry a lot about crime in America. We're very obsessed with crime. And poverty kills 10 times as many people as homicide. And many of those homicides themselves are linked to poverty. Poverty kills more than 5 times as many people as from firearms, and 2.6 times as many people as drug overdose. And of course, those risks are associated with poverty as well. Cumulative poverty kills even more. So if you've been poor for a very, very long time, as many people are, it's as much as 10% of deaths and almost 300,000 deaths, okay? And I'll move on to the next slide now and just summarize this a little bit more big picture. We should think of poverty as responsible for a huge amount of mortality. I underline our estimates are conservative. It's probably much higher than this. And even if you don't want to call poverty a cause of death, it's as big as the fourth leading cause of death. So we could even say it's more than the fourth leading cause of death, okay? Now beyond that, I would see that—
What's ahead of it?
What's ahead of it? Cancer, heart disease, and it's on the slide right before it. Go back one slide if we can. So cancer, heart disease, and I believe lower respiratory disease is next highest, okay? Yeah, and dementia is a big cause of poverty. Thank you. Okay, all right, so if we go back to the last slide, I would argue that this gives us a clear understanding of some puzzles we've had. It gives us a key piece of the puzzle. So it's not news. Everybody knows that there are enormous racial and ethnic disparities in mortality in America, that African American people are likely to live 4 or 5 years younger, to die 4 or 5 years younger than white people. And this is a key piece of that puzzle. Because there are huge racial disparities in poverty, which there are, that's a reason why we see such big disparities in mortality. Moreover, we've long known that the United States has high mortality compared to other rich democracies, that we don't live as long as they live in Germany and Japan and France and other places. And the reason, a big reason for this, is that we have these very, very high rates of poverty. Now, beyond that, I would say that I want us to think about this in terms of a cost-benefit exercise, all right? And what I really want is not just to have a moral victory. We're a moral campaign, we're a moral movement, but I don't want us to be satisfied with moral victories. I want to win. I want to change the discussion, change the debate, influence policy so we reduce this poverty.
And let me help you as a moral. See, this is why we got to be in conversation. Because, see, those of you all in the academy often think that morality is the feel good. It's not. You cannot be moral without economic victory.
Correct. Yeah,
So you do want a moral victory. That's because if you want to change policy, see, that's the difference. We put morality like it's over here, and then cost. A budget is a moral document.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
A health bill is a moral document. So it's actually saying the same thing. And then here you have to kind of be careful. You don't want not like to win, but over here we just being moral. No, the Constitution says establish justice. Ain't a damn thing just about poverty being the fourth leading cause of death. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. I was thinking about it in terms of like, you know, if your team is losing a game and it comes from behind and it gets really close and almost wins the game, but came back and battled hard, we might call that
that ain't a moral victory.
That's
Look,
not
I
a moral
played
victory.
football. Don't even bring that in the room. We talking about winning. We either gonna win now or win later. We're not satisfied with compromise. We're not. That's the problem now. Too many folk are satisfied with a little bit.
Yeah.
And this movement, that's why in this movement, if somebody says we're gonna raise the minimum wage to $12, ain't y'all happy? No. we want it to be what it ought to be. So I'm just gonna agree and say that's why we gotta have social scientists and theologians in the same space.
Right on.
So we can because we gotta get our language right.
Okay.
So So let's just say, let's just shake hand on the social scientists and the preacher wanna win.
Right on.
All right, now.
So, you know, one way to think about this is I want us to get evidence. And again, Reverend Barber is much more useful than I'll ever be, but I want to be at least a little useful so I can offer some evidence that we can use. We can use this evidence. So, you know, if somebody sadly passes away and there's some company that's negligent, they're responsible for the death, there's probably going to be a lawsuit, there's going to be a settlement, and they're going to pay the family for the loss of that person, their family. If we have a new if we have a new government regulation, they do a cost-benefit exercise. They're like, well, how many lives does this save? How much does it cost? And everybody agrees that you can put a dollar value, sadly, on human life. You can put a dollar value on it. But let's play this game. It's $5-10 million per life. If you lose a breadwinner to a family, you got to take care of that family. You got to compensate that family. All right? So let's put a dollar value on these 183,000 deaths.
Yes, sir.
Right. And let's say we do it very, very conservatively. That 183,000 is a conservative estimate. Now let's estimate the value of a human life very conservatively. Let's just say $1 million. That's cheap. Okay? Even if you do that, that results in $183 billion that would be saved by reducing poverty. $183 billion. That's more than we spend on SNAP, or what we know as food stamps. That's more than 10 times what we spend on temporary assistance to needy families. That's more than we spend on the EITC, the CTC, and what have you. So the cost of social policies should be compared against the cost of all this death from poverty. And if we do that cost-benefit analysis, if we convince policymakers that it's cost-effective to fight poverty, this gives us hopefully a useful argument in our campaign.
And Dr. Brady, you don't know how useful you are in that, because here's what we are arguing in this movement. That what you just said is in fact, see, economics used to be only studied under the concept of moral philosophy. Economics was not a set alone. We took it out of moral philosophy so that economics could be seen as benign and moral. It's not. Economics kills. In the scriptures, in the Jewish scriptures, for instance, it says that a nation must loose the bands of wickedness. Loose the bands of wickedness means pay people what they deserve.
Absolutely.
Then it says that nation cannot repair its economic breaches until it does that. Yeah. So in a real sense, I'm glad you're doing this, because what we're saying is it is immoral to, in fact, make poor people pray, P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y. It is, the scripture said, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor. The scripture teaches that a nation will never be prosperous as long as it's hurting the poor. So what happens here is we're actually showing the nation there's this intersectionality. You can't be in Congress and every time you get in office, you swear yourself into office on a Bible, a Quran, or a Bible, a Quran, or a Torah, and you don't know what's in either one of them. Especially when it relates to how you treat the least of these. So this is very powerful what you're doing. Yes, sir. Keep on.
Okay, last thing I'll say on this issue is that how do we use this for political mobilization? Well, I would argue that, of course, compassion and sympathy, emotional evocation are always good things. And many people can do this much better than me. But what I would also say, we also should argue that reducing poverty is in the interests of everyone. And that's helpful to make this argument. That's the last thing I'll say.
And it's so important that you say that because you know how you did that thing? Some of us can argue the companion pointed at me. No, I argue numbers, baby. And this movement argues numbers. And that's why we have you, because as long as we have a separation, like it feels good, but it's good for, no, it's both and. Yeah. The nation will never get itself together as long as you have a permanent poverty in this nation that does not have to be. Poverty does not have to exist. In fact, let me start there. Let's thank this doc. Thank him for this research. Thank you. You won an hours now, Doc. Now let me ask you a question. What number did you use as the baseline for poverty? Because, when we started this movement, we did some studies and we looked at poverty and low wealth. And the number came out to be 43% of the nation, 50% of our children, over 140 million people, poverty and low wealth. I'm going to ask my sister economic policy in a minute on this. And somebody tried to question us, and they said, well, really, there's only 30, 40 million poor people. And I asked them, well, what number? And they said, well, the government says that if you make about $13,000 a year, you're not poor. So there are actually legislators and congresspeople that argue that at $725, you make $15,000 a year, which puts you in the low middle class. You're not poor. Can I say what I would say if we were on the football line and we were trying to go across? Can you wham out a minute, Doc? Just wham out a minute. Just, and then I'm gonna come to my sister about that crazy number to try to limit poverty to some, $13,000. You're not poor.
The best way to define poverty is define it simply. It just means, very, very simply, you do not have enough resources, however we measure resources, to meet your needs. Okay, that's all it is. You don't have enough resources to meet your needs. And we can measure resources different way. I just look at income because I'm a boring academic and we got good data on that. But wealth is a resource too, right? So what I agree upon is it's just a shortage of resources relative to your needs. Now, what's usually used is the official poverty measure, which is absurd. It's utterly absurd.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredibly low threshold. It underestimates poverty massively. Everybody agrees it's not a good way to measure poverty. And so what I'm using is a classic international way is to say what's the middle of the income distribution, the median of the income distribution, and what's 1/2 of that. We'll call that a relative poverty measure. Mine's not perfect.
Okay.
I would entirely embrace measuring wealth as well. I just don't have as good a data on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we can't hear you out there on this, but thank you. Now, so you agree with our measurement, and we say low poverty and low wealth or poverty and low wages. Let me ask you one question. Did your numbers did you disaggregate by geographic areas?
Not in this study. We don't have the data for that, so we need to do more studies. Again, it stunned me that the government doesn't have the number of deaths associated with poverty. We have estimates on smoking, obesity, we have estimates on all kinds of things. Why don't we have a number on this? So I thought it was like, surely I'm wrong. Surely somebody has got this number, and we've only done really the first of what needs to be many studies on this.
Well, one of the things that we know in this movement that folk want to put it in a box. They don't want to talk about it. I mean, we did an analysis of every presidential debate for the longest time. We can't find anywhere where poverty got 30 minutes attention. So here you have an issue that's affecting, that might be one of the studies you do.
Yeah,
can you give me credit on that? Can you give me this one? Okay, all right. I'm helping him. Y'all see that? Y'all see it right? Okay. But but seriously, we look at all these presidential debates and we said, wait a minute, you got 43% of the people poor and low wealth or low wages, over 50% of the children, and not one person running for president or for Senate ever gets asked if you get elected. But you get asked about these crazy cultural wars, and you get asked about stuff like banning books and what are you going to do about immigrants or people who aren't coming to America? They're coming back home because America stole Texas from them. I mean, okay, let me not go there. But my point is that you know, homicide is heard every night on the news, and every presidential candidate runs saying, "Part of what I'm going to do is keep you safe." And yet here's this data. So it's so important. Let me ask over here. When you hear this, to the Greg and to Valerie, and you hear David's piece, and you look at, if we talk about, you know, what's killing people, you know, we talk Black Lives Matter, and we talk about police killing, and we talk about the deaths during COVID. But when we look at the lives lost to poverty, Black lives, white, Latino, Native, you know, as Dave, I'm gonna come to you first, Greg, as a public health specialist, and you're in the same field my daughter is. When you hear Brady's presentation this morning, what do you want to say about that to this movement and to the nation? The nation's listening. C-SPAN. Talk to us a little bit.
So a couple of things. One is, over 175 years ago, a doctor was sent to a typhus epidemic in a part of Poland and Germany. And he came back and he said, medical statistics will be our guide. We'll look to see where the dead lie thicker among the workers or the privileged. Do you see where I'm going? The point is,
talk a little bit louder so we can.
Medical statistics will be our guide. We'll look to see where the dead lie thicker among the workers or the privileged. There's a field called social medicine, and this doctor, Rudolf Virchow, basically discovered that poverty kills 175 years ago, right? 175 years ago. One of the first things they teach you in public health school, like Sherelle and I both went to public health school, is that it's not just about pills and antibodies that keep you healthy, right? I wake up every morning and I take my anti-HIV, antiretroviral medicines, right? I'm alive 25 years later because of them. But guess what? 80% of our health is not about the biomedical, right? It's about what we call the social determinants of health. It's about income, but it's about housing, it's about education, it's about all the things we need to keep ourselves safe and happy and healthy, right? 80% of health is based on the social determinants of health. Now, we talked about how poverty kills, but let's talk about life expectancy in the US. The Institute for Health Metrics in Seattle ranked us in the 40s worldwide for life expectancy, right? That doesn't mean just France, Germany. It means many countries that are much, much poorer than we are. And you know what they say? By 2040, we will be in the 60s in global health rankings in terms of life expectancy. And so it doesn't surprise me that poverty kills. It hasn't surprised many people in public health that this is indeed the facts, but what we need to do to lift ourselves up is to address poverty, but also all the social protections that keep us safe, right? All the protections that keep us safe. You need a good place to live. You need a good job. You need clean water. You need proper sanitation. And this is what we fought for public health. You think of public health as a science and you do it in academic centers. We were campaigners, right? The history of public health is the history of social movements and the history of the sanitation movement, clean water, sewage disposal, all of this. And we've done it before. So there's a proud history in this movement that links back 150, 175 years ago, right? The other thing is that we need to realize that those who have power to make choices that create poverty, right? They don't get it wrong. They don't get it wrong by mistake or by ignorance. They make this, and this isn't me. These are two economists, a guy named Daron Acemoglu from MIT, I probably butchered his name, and a guy named James Robinson, who's at the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
And they wrote a book called Why Nations Fail. They went back to BC all the way to the current time, and it's always about this. Right?
Say that again, why?
Nations fail.
We have, okay.
It's a book stop, but the passage in that book that stopped me cold was this one about people making choices. People are poor, people are in poverty because other people make choices, and choices that benefit them. There are incentives, right? There are incentives built into systems that keep people sick, that keep people poor. Matthew Desmond, a sociologist from Princeton University, just wrote a book called Poverty, by America. And it's all about who benefits from keeping people poor, right? And so it's the same thing for public health and ill health. We're sick, we're dying, not because of who we are, right? It's because of choices other people make. Remember, we spend more on health in the United States than almost every other industrialized democracy, and we have these outcomes that are 40th in ranking, 60th in ranking for life expectancy.
So Greg, you know, Desmond is on our team. You know, we pulling in all the scholars because every movement's got to have these footnotes. So when you hear us as a movement, because we dig deep into data, I want y'all to be clear on that. This is not a feel-good type movement. We dig deep into data because the data, you know, where your treasure is where your heart is. You can't talk to me about your morality unless you be showing me where you're spending your money and who's benefiting that and where you stand in relationship to the dispossessed. But when you hear us say, we need a third Reconstruction to end poverty and low wealth and low wages, to end it. Greg, does that sound like some way outlandish dream that we shouldn't be pursuing, or is it right, like what the special rapporteur for poverty said to me at the UN when he said, Reverend Barber, we got 3 lies that are just lies. The lie of scarcity. You don't have a scarcity resource. The lie that we don't know what to do, or that poverty is simply poor people's bad choices, and rather than the bad choices of our economic choices. And then he said, but the third lie is that we don't have the moral capacity morally to reshape our policy. He said all of those are lies. We have all of that. The issue is, will we do it? And if you all aren't going to call for ending poverty and low wealth, then you might as well stay out of the game, because you got plenty of people that just want to tweak it a little bit and feel real good. So when you hear that as a public health scientist, you think we out there somewhere?
No, I say, where do you sign up, right? Where do you sign up? No, seriously, seriously. So this isn't about poverty, it's about existential politics, right? About whose way of life gets to survive, right? And it's not about, you know, and if you start thinking about the environment, there's an environmental epidemiologist at the University of Toronto, but an American, who said this is about whose way of life gets to survive. Is it ExxonMobil and Shell? Or is it Miami Beach and the Maldives who will sink underwater? This is about whether we're going to survive as a species or not. So everybody, this is not just about poverty. It's of course about poverty, but it's about existential politics, about who gets to survive.
Yeah. Literally the heart, soul, and life of the world and the democracy. And y'all, we have to remember that. That's why we don't have time for foolishness. What we're doing is not tiddlywinks. We can't beat up on each other, because we're really fighting for the very soul and life of the world and the nation. And you know, telling the truth in a time of lies is the first major revolution. You just got to tell the truth. And lastly, when Desmond talks about, he says the abolition of poverty. And I love that language, the abolition of poverty. You know, that we need to put that, and we need to push and see which politicians and others are willing to say that, and we got to push them to do it, and we got to have a movement that constantly pushes and will not back up on that. And I hear you agreeing with that. Valerie, here you are, an economist from EPI, Economic Policy Institute, and you don't do your politics for Democrats, for Republicans. You don't do your analysis based on party. You do your analysis based on facts. And we're so glad that you would come today. Talk to us a little bit about what you hear and want to say based on what's been said, and the cost of this. And I say the moral cost, meaning moral means human, economic, all of it. It's all component of. And maybe respond if you feel comfortable in doing it. After looking at the data, if we were to recover what I think his name was Ingalls in the 18th century said, when he looked at the policies and said that if politicians and policymakers know on the front end that a policy is causing death and they implement it anyway, then you must call what they're doing policy murder or policy death. And then he said, not manslaughter, because manslaughter would mean you didn't know. Do we have any excuse for not knowing, Valerie? And what is your response? I don't want to tie you in a box. I'm trying to give you your response to this.
So first of all, I want to start off sort of where we were talking about the numbers and where these numbers come from. We've thrown a lot of numbers out here. I think David's definition of poverty really gets to it in a very basic sense. Poverty is just having inadequate income or economic resources to meet your basic material needs. But I also like the idea that you all are bringing in a broader definition and thinking about it in terms of poverty, meaning inadequate income, and low wealth.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because income and wealth are two different things. Your income is what you have coming in on a regular basis, whether that be weekly or monthly. Typically a paycheck for most people in this country, but also other kinds of resources and benefits that people receive. Your wealth then is what you have access to if those payments were to stop. And so even when we find that by income standards, people may be typically, what am I trying to say? May be literally above the poverty threshold, many more people are much closer to that, because if that income were to stop, there's nothing there to catch them.
That's right. Okay, I got you.
And so that's why I think it's important to have that broader definition when we're having these kinds of discussions. I also think a lot of the language that was used during the pandemic and in sort of crafting the pandemic response is interesting and instructive, as you were just making points about the morality of our policy making and whether we know what to do, whether we have the resources to do it. A lot of the language that we used at that time, and we said this ourselves at EPI, that the pandemic policy response was generally effective for limiting the depth and the length of the crisis because we had a response at the scale of the problem. So we didn't just throw pennies at it. We had a big economic policy response. The other thing that we hear as it relates to that is that we had a policy response of that magnitude because we were responding to a global economic and public health crisis. It's interesting that we can use that kind of language in response to the pandemic, but in light of the idea that poverty is the fourth leading cause of death, I would say those are things that apply all the time, right?
Right. No, we're not just doing a pandemic.
There's always an economic crisis.
That's right.
In many communities around this country. There's always a public health crisis in communities around this country. And that requires that we have a response at the scale of that problem. And so I would argue that many of the things that we did during the pandemic, by expanding access to a lot of income supports like the unemployment insurance, the child tax credits, economic impact payments, was basically just getting a check, the government sending checks to people because they know people need money to meet their basic material needs. Again, we know what it takes to address the issue of poverty. But they also did things that directly impacted, like food insecurity. For children, school-aged children, regardless of where you were on the income scale, they were providing free meals. Why is that not something that can be done during a time that is not just a global or national crisis time?
So I guess I'm hearing Dave and Greg and Valerie, you all saying something that we need to say. We had a COVID pandemic start in 2019, but we had a poverty pandemic and epidemic before the COVID pandemic.
Right.
And if we had been addressing the poverty, low wealth, low wage epidemic before COVID, COVID wouldn't have even been so bad. We'd have been more prepared to deal with COVID.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. Benefits addressing housing insecurity. They had things that prevented people from being put out of their homes during the pandemic. So again, we know what to do, and it is just a matter of actually getting it done. And this issue of what poverty costs is one thing, but also the issue of who benefits from poverty.
Can I ask you and David, I'm gonna come to Valerie in a minute and jump in on this. I want y'all to flip that question over, because one thing in this movement, we often find that, a misdiagnosis is gonna make you sicker. A misdiagnosis is gonna make you sicker. You're already sick, but if you get if you got a misdiagnosis about who is poor, your only way of looking at poverty, first of all, if you say it's people's own personal decision, that's one of the misdiagnoses. That goes all the way back to the critics of the New Deal. It goes all the way back to the critics of the Freedmen's Bureau after slavery, where there's articles were written saying basically black people are just immoral, so there's no need for us to keep spending this money, and they discounted all the damage that was done during slavery. I mean, it's just bad, misdiagnosis. If you misdiagnose what a real living wage is, then you only make people sicker. If you misdiagnose the need for health care. The other thing is if you raise the wrong question. So I want to flip a question over and have y'all respond. Joseph Stiglitz, who's a friend of this movement, says, the part of the problem in America is we keep asking the wrong question. Every time we sit down to do analysis, first of all, what if we had done, and we agree with a number of things that happened during the pandemic and the response. We're not anti-everything. But the question we ask is, what if the response had been built from the poor up? If it wasn't a neoliberal middle class up and a trickle down, up, down, but from the poorest up, I'm going to raise that question here. What if we went from the poor? And then secondly, what if our question was not what will it cost to fix poverty, but what is it costing it for poverty to stay like it is? Can you all talk a little bit about the cost of things staying as it is? I'm gonna throw that question in, I'm gonna go to Val, but all of you, just take a shot at it.
Okay.
What the cost of things being as they are. You have any?
Oh,
Yeah, both, all of you. I will just jump in.
You go first, Val.
All right, so the cost of things being as they are, I think, it starts with this whole idea that we started this session off, making this nation live up to its promise. Who are we as a country if we allow poverty to stay as it is? What does that say about this supposedly being the greatest country on the earth, the most land of the most opportunities, if we know what we can do to address this problem and only do it periodically for limited periods of time? So I think our entire existence and our entire idea of what it means to be America is at stake, in addition to the lives that are being lost due to poverty.
Take a shot, Greg.
So if we had gone into the pandemic being first in life expectancy in the rankings, right, it would have meant that we dealt with healthcare in the U.S. It would have meant that we had dealt with social protections, housing, food assistance, all the things that undergird our health. So we went in number 44 and we paid for it, right?
Wait. You did not just sit in here and say that with all the bragging we do about being better, and I love this country, I love it enough to critique it, but you did not just sit in here and say that we went into this pandemic the 44th in life expectancy.
We did. We came out being the highest per capita deaths from COVID and the highest excess deaths from COVID among the G7, the big, rich industrial democracies. It's not rocket science, right? We didn't invest in healthcare, we didn't invest in social protections, and it came back to bite us, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
No, let's hear this in some real somber. Take a shot.
So what is the cost? It's hundreds of billions of dollars, if you want to think of it that way. Just even if, I would be delighted with abolition of poverty, but even if we moved American poverty from being this outlier to a typical rich democracy, which would mean we cut it in half, that would save way over $100 billion. One of the ways to think about this is that in the early 1980s, we ran an experiment where we gradually expanded Medicaid across the United States for children. So before the 80s, it was very rare for poor kids in the South to get Medicaid. Afterwards, there was slightly more access to Medicaid. Now, 30, 40 years later, we can see where those kids went, and it saves millions, billions of dollars because they're healthier, they do better, they live longer, they're less likely to have chronic disease. So there's both that short-term cost, $100 billion, but there's also a long-term cost in that we're squandering the potential of the country.
And so Valerie, thank you. So Valerie, when the Economic Policy Institute, when we did our third Reconstruction budget, we told y'all to tear it apart. You know, go after it, critique it. And you all came back and said that not only was the budget good, it was in the black budget, if I will. In other words, to invest in these things doesn't leave the country in the red, it would actually put the country in the black. It would put the country ahead. Is that still true? That the investment in these things, you know, it would not break us, it would actually build us as a nation.
Let me give you a very practical example of how that works. I was talking about the pandemic policy response and all of the different resources that were made available. What that also did was contribute to a very robust labor market. So now we're looking at really low unemployment, in large part because we made those investments, because we provided resources to people so that everybody could participate in the economy. And that helped to boost job growth, and ultimately what that also contributed to was that we saw for the first time in like 40 years that wages grew the fastest for lower wage workers. Now they're still grossly insufficient to care for a family, but we did see that wage growth. So in making those investments contributed to the broader economy, but also helped to raise wages for those at the bottom. Now the next thing that we need to do is raise the minimum wage so that we're able to protect those gains and continue to raise.
So if we had had investment in jobs, low unemployment, and high wages, we'd be in an even better shape.
We'll be in even better shape.
But to have low unemployment and then low wages is actually another misdiagnosis.
Yes.
It actually defeats the purpose to some degree. On this issue, I need to ask you all something, and if I'm wrong, if we're wrong, I'll say it. We've been hearing on the news during the inflation that the way you deal with inflation is you have to stop wage expansion. In other words, you've got to keep wages low in order to deal with inflation. So what happens is some economists end up arguing that you can't do certain things for poor and low wealth and low wage persons because if you do that, it increases inflation. We've had a number of folks tell us that's exactly a misdiagnosis of why we really have inflation in the first place. People making more money the cause of inflation? Who want to take a shot at that one? Go ahead.
I'll take a shot at that one. Is people having more money the cause of inflation in this particular environment where we're in? No. You know, there are a lot of things that contributed to inflation this time. Again, we were having a global pandemic and all of the things that wrought in terms of, you know, people shifting their consumption from services to more goods. We had the whole supply shock thing that, you know, everybody heard about. It's harder to get things, so that causes prices to go up. There's a war in Ukraine, so that raises prices to some extent. Corporate profits contributed to the increase.
And price gouging.
Price
right?
gouging
and,
is a piece of that.
Yeah, you know, look just some of that. And what is the book?
And so the real question when we're thinking about wages and whether or not it's going to influence inflation, you have to consider whether wages are growing faster than inflation. That's when it becomes a problem. Because then wages go up, then prices go up, then wages have to go up again because prices are high and it just keeps spiraling. That's not the case. So at this point, no, we don't need to suppress wages to bring inflation down. In fact, wage growth has been slowing in recent years and recent months probably more likely. So wage growth is actually helping to dampen inflation as opposed to making it worse at this particular point.
So go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say another example is think about places where in the U.S. economy where costs are out of control. I think of the healthcare industry, and it's surely not because the wages are too high for the janitors and the nurses and the assistants. It's because drug industry is making tons of money. The insurance companies are making too much money. The hospital corporations are making too much money, and all of them are bilking Medicaid and Medicare. So the healthcare is a perfect example of the inefficiency of the American economy. So when our costs are out of control, it's not because the workers are doing too well.
Well, the old lie is that folk like in this room and the movements like this just want a handout, just want, welfare. But I know that, yeah. But the question, I want to say to the nation what the lies are. That's why I'm saying it up here. See, because to help a nation, you got to tell her what her lies are. Right, yeah, right. The misdiagnosis is real, y'all. And so the lie that health care is a handout, the lie is that a living wage is a handout, when really it is just equal protection under the law. It's just promoting the general welfare. It's just the right thing to do. But even in David, I want to raise one more question or comment up here. We have some numbers that say if we had just raised the minimum wage to $15, when 2 Democrats and 49 Republicans blocked one vote, that millions of people, closer to 40 million people, would have come up out of low wages, but it would have also pumped $330-some billion in the economy. And if, in fact, corporations weren't getting so much corporate welfare and would pay their workers, then you wouldn't have to be trying to kick people off public assistance because people would have sufficient wages and sufficient income. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah.
Take a shot at it.
Well, I want to add something. I think you
I'm gonna come to you,
mentioned.
Val. I want to
Sure.
get one. I want to hear
Go
one of them
ahead.
just take one shot at it. This question is, if you really want people off of public assistance, then pay them what they deserve, because a lot of people are working. Is that? We get about a second. Yes, sir. Is that right?
Want to talk? Let her talk.
Sir, this is my friend. She's like a daughter to me. We know what we're doing up here, brother. We're not saying we're not having foolishness now.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you
But
don't
we're
have to
good.
defend her. This girl is like a daughter to
We're
me.
good.
We're good. Yes, one more question.
Okay. So yes, so there's a statistic, the majority, about 59 or 60% of workers whose total income is below the poverty line would receive a pay increase if the minimum wage were increased. So yes, the minimum wage would have a significant impact on those living below the official poverty line.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, as we had planned, there's a reason why we asked Valerie to do this at the end, this point. She's a constitutional lawyer. She was a part of the successful legal team that won against voter suppression in the South. And it was the first of its kind voter suppression fight case where we brought together black people, white women, students, churches, synagogues, former military, rural people, urban people, as plaintiffs in a case against racist voter suppression. We won, and even the Supreme Court that was put there stacked they thought to agree with, had to agree when our case came forward that what they were doing was a form of racism with surgical intent that was actually hurting the entire democracy. And she introduced me to a concept through a couple of other attorneys
called impoverished democracy. And that is why we wanted her to close this. This is by design. She also did not grow up in this country, was not born in this country, and has often said to me sometimes, Reverend Barber, I don't understand what I'm seeing. Why? Considering where I've come from. So I asked her, out of her heart, not just out of her legal mind. She's the Associate Managing Director of the Public Policy and Public Theology Center at Yale. Valerie, you've heard. Closing argument.
Well, so a couple of things before I talk about, I think, our nation. As Dr. Brady and Bishop Barber have shared about the value add argument of alleviating poverty and the moral argument for alleviating poverty, it's the right thing to do, but it's also our duty. And I think one of the things that our nation has gotten so good at is this PR argument and this fight that we have to do, the research that has to be done, the analysis that has to be done for things that should be true. It is this nation's duty to provide for its people. That is what governments are for. And so I think it's important to add a third one to that list. Yes, it's the right thing to do. Yes, it adds value to the economy. It's our nation's duty. And one of the things we've been doing in this movement is to shift the narrative. It's not just about having people talk about poverty, but it's having people reorient their minds around what their nation owes them as citizens and as people living in a country, as human beings living in a country. And so I think one of the things I really wanted to talk about is it's time to put a mirror up to the United States of America. I've lived in the United States and in Nigeria for about the same amount of time. I've spent the same amount of time in both countries. And this is a country that I love. This is a country that has helped my parents. This is a country that has helped me as a first-generation immigrant. But I also think that we have to tackle these issues. We have to say to this nation, we have to undo the lies. We have to make sure we're understanding how we are sweeping under the rug things that are affecting. I really thought it was important that we started this presentation with people's voices.
That's right.
With people's stories. It's easy to sweep it under the rug when you don't see people, when you don't feel them, when you don't hear them. And so one of the things we have done in this country is sometimes overanalyze, but not listen to the people. And that's one of these things that this movement is doing. I grew up in Nigeria, and when I hear research like this, when I read Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, I can't imagine that this is the same America, that people would stand in lines to get visas to, still stand in lines today. I can't imagine that this is the same America that people are clamoring to get into. Of course, poverty in other impoverished nations is much higher, that's true. But by design, this country has set itself out to the world as a leader on democracy, as a leader on innovation, and its people are suffering. And it's time that we stop hiding behind this exceptionalism. It's just not true. And so I really am so grateful. I think one of the things, and thank you, sir, but my role really was to convene us. One of the things that the center does and aims to do is to bring into conversation various voices from a legal perspective, from a religious perspective, from an economic perspective, from a public health perspective. We have to start talking to each other. And so this has been a fantastic conversation and really will ground us as we move through the rest of this Congress. So I'll turn it back to you, Bishop Barber.
Yeah, we want... Write this down. By design. See, when you go and buy a car and it starts operating different than its design, you don't say, well, at least it runs 3 days, but their car only runs 1. You do a recall. And the recall is based on design is faulty. And you fix it. You fix it. You fix it. You don't throw the cars away. you fix it. Nobody's asking throw America away, but we are saying fix it. Because by design you said this. By design you said this. And even in your great hymns you say, America, mend thine every flaw. We mourn when we see soldiers die. We're talking about the soldiers of every day, the everyday people that work hard, struggle, survive in a system that does not have to be. By design, you said it wasn't supposed to be this, so fix it. We had to have a first Reconstruction to fix it. And that Reconstruction was killed and murdered and torn apart by 1890s. We had a second Reconstruction to fix it. 1954, Brown decision, all the way up to 1968. That movement was murdered, killed, and destroyed. So we've never finished the Reconstruction. But what we are saying is the Reconstruction spirit may have at times been killed and pushed back, but it rises again. And it rises in us. Fix it. And then we've heard it's fixable. It's not even like you got to do 50 things. We got 28 things in the third Reconstruction agenda. 28 things. And the 28 things are going to benefit everybody. But we have to have the moral truth and stop lying and saying it isn't broken. And in order to show that it's broken, we got to put faces and facts together. And we got to bring conversations that inform movement. See, this is not a benign conversation or a conversation isolated from movement. That's why this was designed like this, right? We put the footnote and the facts and the foot soldiers all together. And then we walk by faith and not by sight. And we can keep going and keep going. My brothers and sisters, from the videos to now, every number you heard up here represents some person. We've been here for an hour and 20 people have died from poverty. I know enough about America's history to know until she's broken and cries, she does not change. It was only when she had to look at all the unnecessary caskets coming from Vietnam that she changed. And so we cannot let these deaths be unseen. In a real sense, this is our time to be like Emmett Till's mama. And say, you're going to look at this. We're not going to blow you up. We're not going to shoot you. We don't need that. But you're going to look at this. You're going to see this. We're not going to allow folk to die in silence and alone. No, we're going to walk. If we got to walk with a casket, we got to put pictures on. We got everywhere we go, you're going to see it and you're going to feel it because the design is not being followed. The corrected design is not being followed. And we can fix it, and it needs to be fixed. And what we don't need is misdiagnosis, false narratives, and as my grandma used to say, putting lipstick on a pig. So turn to your neighbor and say, you're not my enemy. Turn it up. I want us to be very careful in how we talk to one another. This is not a space where nobody's trying to hurt anybody. We had a design for today. And I understand some spaces people have been in before, but this is a love space. We're not here to do everything. We can't do everything in this conference. You know, we're not here to fix every little thing that happens. It has happened inside of your coordinating committee. We're going to have a special session in September to do that. We're here to do policy, to go on Capitol Hill, to put this before the nation, to prepare for what's going to happen next year. We need every state involved. putting this before state capitals. We need to come back to DC in the most massive way. In June, we need to have a massive turnout at the poll. We need to do a few things so well. And we need to put a spotlight on this so big. And we need to create a microphone so loud that we cannot and will not be denied. We cannot bring those from the dead back to life, but we can challenge and stop more death from happening. And so we close this session. Yara, if you're here, there's a song that they sung, and people who misinterpret the singing, Greg, Valerie, and David, and there's two Valeries, they misinterpret it because they think that when the folk were singing it, they meant like for a long time, and it was kind of a passivity. But the song says, hold on just a little while longer. Justice, as Dennis called me, it says, Martin done told me, and Rosa has done told me. What's that song, Yara? They done told me that everything's gonna be all right. And what it was a way of singing to encourage you to stay in the fight. See, I don't think I will be judged and you will be judged if we don't accomplish everything we fight for. But I think we will be judged if we don't fight. And I know that you can't have any change till you call for it and face it and work for it. And what I do know is something that Benny Mays said. The sin in life is not reaching your goals, it's having none to reach. And one of the greatest sins of this country right now is low aim. And so we compromise on people's lives because we got low aim. We think all we can do is just a little bit of tweaking on poverty, low aim. And we've got to call this nation to higher ground. So if the team is here, I want everybody to stand. Has this been helpful? Yeah. Would you celebrate these scholars? Are y'all glad they on our team? Y'all glad we got David? We got Greg? We got Valerie, and a host of other people? Come on out here, Liz. Liz is gonna close us out in a minute.
We also have members of media.
Who?
Yeah, 3 members of media.
Media, do you have any questions? We got some questions from the media. Hold on one second. Yes, would you raise them? Give her a mic. You
Hello?
take a seat for a second. Yes, ma'am. Take one seat. Thank you. Hold on.
Okay, Bob Henley with WBAI. Thanks for convening this multidisciplinary panel, Reverend. So much of your work in North Carolina was rooted in place and moral witness. Will you continue that kind of site-specific work in New Haven, where Yale, one of the nation's most richly endowed universities, is set in a community where 31% of the black population is living in poverty as compared to 6% of the white population statewide?
No, I'm not going to continue. I've already started. I went there to do it. So it's not even an issue of continuing. Where my body goes, my fight goes. So, and it's not that I will continue, it's already happening. Just last week, 1199 in New Haven and in Connecticut was standing up and using the Moral Monday movement to go to jail at the state capitol and to fight for a living wage. I'm not going anywhere to lead a movement because I don't believe in helicopter leadership. I'm going there to join in wherever the movement is. Next question. Now, we want the media that's, one more question. Next question.
Just one, yeah. Reverend Barber, across the country, people like Chris Smalls and his independent Amazon union that organize the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island are following the law, and yet the corporations are spending millions of dollars to fight them.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes, sir.
Because I'm going to talk back to you. Now, you ain't asked us now one question about what we talking about. Now, that's good. I'm not talking down to you. But this part of the media was for you to ask questions about what we talked about. And we got to be disciplined. So do you have a question to these scholars?
Yes, sir.
Okay, raise that question.
Yes. Do you think the fact, to any of the scholars, the fact that the U.S. was 4% of the world's population and 12% of the deaths from COVID globally, that actually the fact that so many poor people were underinsured and not insured actually drove the death toll and made all of America unsafe?
Powerful. That's a power. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah.
Craig?
Great.
So, as we said, 80% of health outcomes are due to things that are not about pills into bodies. Yes, we're under-vaccinated, right? Poor people of color have had difficulty in accessing vaccines and treatments like Paxlovid, but we went in 44, right? We went in 44 in life expectancy with low social protections, a shredded safety net, a weak healthcare system, and that's why we had such bad outcomes in COVID compared to our peer nations.
And I want y'all to know, see that guy right there? He's my friend. Amen. See, we love each other. Next question, real question. Real question for the panel. From the media.
Yo,
which media are you
Barber.
with? Who are you with?
Mark Ruhenberg from People's World.
All right.
You said early on, we've been talking about what to do, and you said early on about what not to do. You said this is no time for foolishness. If you're here for foolishness, exit. Give us some idea of what foolishness
would be
Yes.
like going on Capitol Hill and getting caught up in the cookies and the drink rather than staying focused on the issue. Foolishness would be us turning on each other in this room rather than recognizing that we may be flawed, but we are the army we got. And so we got to build one another up rather than tear one another down. Foolishness would be trying to make this about Democrat or Republican rather than critiquing both parties where they need to be critiqued. Foolishness would be acting like we can't make a difference because we really don't know the power that we have. Foolishness would be thinking you can have one event and that's all you need to do and have a moment rather than a movement. Ain't nobody in this room got time for foolishness. Let's go to the song. Come on, stand up.
Just a little while longer. Hold on, just a little while longer. Hold on, just a little while longer. I know justice is coming soon.
Justice
justice is coming soon. We know that justice is coming soon. We know that it's coming soon because it has to come soon. I think about the words of the prophet Jeremiah, who talked about unjust systems and structures in his own day 6,000 years ago. And he said that those in power seem to treat the wounds of the people as if they're not serious. They put on Band-Aids, saying, it's all right, peace. But things are not all right. It's not all right that so many of the leaders in that video before that presentation are no longer with us. It is not right that every person in this room has someone who should be here with us today. It is not right that poverty, homelessness, low wages, the denial of health care, the suppression of our votes have all been not declared a national and international emergency. But we're here, gathered in this Congress, to take that data, to take that truth, to take those facts, and then put feet to our struggle to change all of those conditions. We're getting ready to go to lunch. And I know the feeling is pretty heavy in the room. It is for me. And we're going to sit in that for a bit. We're going to sit in that because that reminds us that this accurate diagnosis of the problem then tells us what an accurate prescription for the problem is going to be. And we're going to have some time, not just during lunch, but after we come back, to dive in and process what this means for the work that we're doing, how it reminds us that we do indeed have to hold on and fight on and march on and pray on and study on and believe on, that we can hold on for that just a little bit while longer. Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. We indeed are a moral resurrection, but we have to stay in the need, the crucifixion, the death, the despair, so that we can see the possibility for hope. We often hear that hope comes in the morning. It's not just idealism. It's not just, it's going to be okay. It's because we're coming together. As Pam reminded us earlier, all of us shouldn't be in a room together. They don't want that. The people in power who are profiting off of pandemic, who are profiting off of low wages, who are making a killing off of poverty, are very scared about this room. And so we're going to get ready. We're going to hold on, or we're going to keep on suiting up for this fight. Before we go to lunch, we have a couple announcements, and I'm going to have Sig and Kate come out and make those. But know that we got some more time and some more work to do together for us to honor those fallen fighters and to take up that work and keep it going on. Hold on. March on. Pray on. Fight on. Because what do we know? And say it to your neighbor, that justice is coming soon. All right.
Hi, everyone. So we're about to break for lunch, and directly after lunch, we will come back to the tables for our small group discussions to process all of this information that we heard this morning. A couple notes about lunch. Lunch is going to be served in both Ballroom West and the Terrace. Both places have the exact same meals, so please go to both locations. Everyone will leave to my right this way that you came in. And please, folks, need some extra support with their mobility, head back up to the International Terrace where breakfast was. You can take the elevator, escalators, and also stairs, and folks will be able to help show you the way that you need to go. And also a reminder that on the International Terrace is where there is a gender-neutral restroom. So this morning, we spent a lot of time and heard this new data that further confirmed that poverty is a policy choice and that it also does not need to be this way. So after we have lunch, we will come directly to our small group discussions. We'll explore what this new data means for us personally, what it means for us in this political moment, and what it means for the power that we're building as the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Just a couple notes about the small groups. Everyone at registration on your yellow folder were assigned a number. That is the number that the table that you will go to directly after lunch. Tables are labeled number 1 through 16, just outside of the ballroom, tables 1 through 16. And then tables from 17 over start this way and over. So please go to the table that you are assigned to. If you are assigned number table 63, 64, or 65, please fill in a table where you see an empty space for you. You are welcome at any table. So thank you all, and we, once again, come back from lunch at 2 p.m. There will not be another announcement to start the small group discussion. There will be a facilitator at each table who will help guide the discussion of the data that we just heard this morning. So please go rest, recharge, nourish your bodies, nourish your souls, sit with this data that we have heard, and we'll see you back at 2 p.m.